Okay, let's dive into this. Welcome to today's Explainer, where we're unpacking a truly fascinating and, frankly, pretty provocative source text. It's one that completely challenges the very foundation of what we typically understand as religion. We are going to be exploring a deep philosophical divide highlighted in our source material: the profound difference between universal morality, which the text calls dharma, and organized sectarianism. The author presents the argument that for millennia, humanity has been making a massive, often violent mistake by confusing the two. It's an analysis that actually spans from ancient philosophical principles all the way to a predicted global spiritual revolution. So, let's look at the core question this text asks us to confront right out of the gate.
Can an atheist be truly religious? Now, conventional wisdom might say, well, absolutely not, right? But according to the source material we're examining today, the answer is a resounding yes. The text presents a really striking premise here. It argues that a person who completely rejects God, who refuses to perform any rituals, and who even actively criticizes religious hypocrisy can actually be far more religious than a devoted worshiper. How does that work? Well, the author posits that true religion is entirely about selflessness. If an atheist acts with pure morality, refrains from harming others, and works for the welfare of society, the source considers them fundamentally aligned with true devotion. It just completely separates moral action from ritualistic belief.
To understand how the author justifies this strict separation, we turn to Section 1, the true meaning of dharma. And this brilliantly illustrates the central thesis of our source material. The text posits that humanity has tragically confused true dharma with organized sectarian religions, which it refers to as mazhabs. The author objectively frames this dividing line, stating that dharma isn't a specific faith, but universal good conduct. We're talking about selflessness, high morality, the foundation of a healthy society. It's literally just the act of not infringing on the rights of others. Conversely, mazhab represents organized sects, exclusive rituals, and divisive dogmas. According to the text, calling a mazhab a dharma is a historic blunder. While these sects might contain a tiny fragment of dharma, they are not the whole shebang. In fact, the text suggests that when you examine these organized sects closely, they often contain flaws that actively separate us from one another.
So, what are the actual consequences of following these organized sects blindly? Let's dig into the historical critiques in Section 2, the dangers of blind faith.
The source text really doesn't hold back in its historical critique, leaning on observations from several prominent Western thinkers to make its point. Here, the author cites Sir Governor Fort to highlight the immense, undeniable bloodshed committed throughout history in the name of faith. The quote explicitly points out that organized religions have often taught people to hate and oppress their opponents, kind of fostering this dangerous illusion that God is actually pleased when you show bias toward your own sect. The text neutrally reports how this blind faith didn't exactly advance humanity. Instead, it brought mankind back to the, quote, brutal habit of breaking each other's heads. It is a stark reminder of the cruelty historically masked as divine duty. Building on that, the text examines the psychological control mechanisms of these sects. Here we have a quote from Reverend M. Reynolds, asserting that the promise of forgiven sins is absolutely dangerous. He compares it to an opium drug that just strips away critical thinking. The source material uses this perspective to launch a fierce critique of transactional rituals across multiple faiths. It specifically references practices like Hindus bathing in the Ganges to wash away lifetimes of sins, Christians seeking baptism to drop their burdens, or similar transactional practices in Buddhism, Jainism, and Islam. The author argues that these are all false promises, essentially an illusion created to purposely derail human intellect and leave people in a sort of half-asleep, uncritical state. And you might be wondering, who benefits from this uncritical state? Well, the text introduces us to a specific archetype, the hypocritical religious leader. The source defines this as someone who secretly harbors a deep disbelief in the very dogmas they preach, yet maintains a strict outward pretense of devotion purely for selfish exploitation. Because the public has been lulled to sleep by those transactional rituals and blind faith we just talked about, they're perfectly primed for manipulation. These leaders, the author notes, commit the worst acts in private while publicly lecturing everyone else on morality. The analysis asks a pretty pointed question. If these religious rituals are so incredibly effective, why don't the leaders themselves genuinely practice what they preach? So, the crucial point is that things might be changing. The source cites philosopher Austin to assert that humanity is finally waking up, claiming the hollowness of religions has been exposed. The central argument here is that the global public is starting to realize that merely adopting a sect doesn't actually grant any real spiritual benefit. World peace, the author relays, is entirely dependent on universal brotherhood. And that is fundamentally impossible as long as we remain trapped in what the text boldly calls religious slavery.
If the author is right, and the era of sectarian division is ending, what exactly comes next? Let's move into the solution phase in Section 3, the coming spiritual revolution.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the sheer scale of the change predicted by the source material. It's massive. Citing the famous thinker H.G. Wells, the text forecasts an inevitable mass uprising. It predicts a near-future revolution where the public will actively fight back against those who have turned faith into a business. It's framed as this grand awakening, where everyday people will systematically dismantle the power of those who have made it a profession to mislead them. The world, the analysis suggests, is actively searching for a unifying belief system that just eliminates discrimination entirely. To paint a clearer picture of what this future looks like, the source outlines Professor Charles Elliott's specific vision for the religion of tomorrow, and it represents a complete paradigm shift. As knowledge increases, the text argues, blind faith will disappear. There will be an end to bowing before idols, an outright rejection of animal sacrifice, and a total end to trying to buy heaven with money or rituals. Instead, this future society will be guided by true patriots, selfless teachers, and promoters of universal truth. True morality replaces transactional salvation. In this newly envisioned era, the very definition of devotion changes completely. The source emphasizes that spending a few minutes a day on rituals or just reading holy texts, well, it simply won't cut it anymore. True devotion will equal maximum selfless sacrifice for public welfare. Actively promoting love, truth, and actively working for the betterment of society will become the absolute sole, uncompromising aim of a truly religious life. But here's the catch. The text claims this progressive, futuristic vision isn't actually new at all. Let's look at our final section, Return to Universal Religion. Let's move to and see how this builds on ancient roots. The text reveals that this upcoming spiritual revolution is actually a homecoming. It points specifically to the ancient tenfold universal religion outlined by Bhagwan Manu thousands of years ago. The author argues that this ancient framework possessed all of these universal moral characteristics from the very beginning. However, humanity basically heard it, ignored it, and allowed itself to become trapped in the webs of organized sects for millennia. Now, after thousands of years of suffering, the text observes humanity is finally desperate to return to the shelter of this original, universal dharma, to find true peace. So, the source material takes us on quite a journey, right? From exposing the historical bloodshed and psychological manipulation of organized sects, all the way to predicting a future where selfless public welfare completely replaces transactional rituals. It challenges us to look past the superficial differences of mazhabs and really embrace the foundational morality of true dharma. So, based on the arguments presented today, I'll leave you with this. Are we finally ready to replace the chains of dogma with the freedom of universal humanity? It's a really profound question to consider as you observe the world around you. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and I hope this deeper look into the source material has sparked your curiosity.